My boss told the board I was too emotionally invested to lead my own project after stealing my work for years. He promoted my junior colleague to take my place. So I took a personal day, but that day was spent in a conference room with his biggest competitor, setting a trap he never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The words hung in the sterile air of my office, more toxic than any chemical I had ever handled. Too emotionally invested. Marcus had delivered the verdict with a placid, almost pitying smile, the kind a parent gives a child who doesn't understand why they can't have dessert before dinner. He had just returned from the executive board meeting, his tie perfectly knotted, his posture radiating a smug satisfaction that turned my blood to ice. My project, my research, my life's work for the last 12 years, codenamed Project Chimera, was being handed over to someone else. To Leo Martinez, a bright, ambitious young man I had mentored myself who had been on the team for less than 2 years. The board feels, and I agree, Marcus had continued, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone, that at this critical final stage, the project needs a leader with a more detached, objective perspective. You've been wonderful, Victoria, absolutely foundational. But your passion, your deep connection to the material, it can be a liability. I sat frozen behind my large oak desk, the one awarded to me for a breakthrough in cellular regeneration 5 years ago. A breakthrough Marcus had presented at the International Symposium in Geneva as his own. My hands were laced together, so tightly, my knuckles were white. I could feel a tremor starting in my fingers, a low-voltage hum of pure, unadulterated rage threatening to short-circuit the calm facade I had spent a career perfecting. I stared at him, at the faint sheen of sweat on his upper lip, the only sign that he was not made of polished marble. He wasn't just taking my work. He was using my dedication, the very quality that had driven every success, as a weapon against me. He was recasting my greatest strength as a hysterical, feminine weakness. He mistook my silence for defeat. Leo will do a fine job steering it through the commercialization phase, he said, already moving toward the door. Your role will be advisory, of course. We still need your expertise, just from a safer distance. The door clicked shut, leaving me in a sudden, ringing silence. The scent of his expensive cologne lingered, an invasive reminder of his presence. I looked around my office, at the framed diagrams on the walls, the shelves groaning under the weight of research journals, the whiteboards covered in complex equations that were as familiar to me as a family portrait. This room was my sanctuary, my command center, the place where I had poured my intellect and my soul into creating something revolutionary. Project Chimera wasn't just a string of data points and lab results. It was a testament to my life's purpose. It was a biointegration technology that promised to change the face of medicine, and I had built it from the ground up, molecule by molecule. A wave of dizziness washed over me. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, the carefully ordered world I had constructed crumbling at the edges. I gripped the arms of my chair, anchoring myself. The shock was a physical thing, a cold weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. He had done it. After all the years of subtle credit stealing, of presenting my findings as his own strategic oversight, he had finally made the killing blow. He hadn't just stolen the treasure. He had rewritten the map to make it look like he'd been the one to draw it all along. The theft of my life's work was one thing. The dismissal of my life's passion as a feminine failing was the wound that would never close. The initial paralysis gave way to a strange, almost surreal clarity. The overwhelming noise of fury and hurt subsided, replaced by a quiet, determined hum. I stood up, my movement stiff at first, then more fluid. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled down a simple cardboard box I kept for transporting documents. I didn't plan to pack up my life, not yet. I just needed to perform an action, any action, to convince my body that I was still in control. I began to place a few personal items into the box. A framed photo of my late parents, a quirky coffee mug my niece had painted for me, a worn copy of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions that had been my guide since graduate school. Each object was a small anchor to the person I was outside of these walls, the Victoria Reed who existed beyond Marcus Thorne's suffocating shadow. My phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID read, Leo Martinez, of course, the newly crowned king calling to survey his domain. I let it ring twice before picking it up, my voice surprisingly steady. Victoria Reed. Torre, Leo's voice was hesitant, tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Guilt, or was it just the awkwardness of the victor speaking to the vanquished? I just heard. From Marcus, I wanted to reach out. Did you? I asked, my tone flat. I continued placing a small, thriving succulent into the box. It was a resilient little plant. I admired that. Look, I had no idea this was coming, he said, his words rushing out. He called me in right after he spoke to you. He said the board made the decision and that you were on board with a transition. He said you wanted to step back. He said I wanted to step back. The lie was so audacious, so perfectly Marcus, that a bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. I smothered it. And you believed him, Leo. There was a pause on the other end of the line. He's the director, Torre. He said it was an executive decision. What was I supposed to do? You could have come to talk to me first, I said softly, but there was no pity in my voice, only a statement of fact. You could have shown the person who trained you, who advocated for your first promotion, the basic decency of a direct conversation. But you didn't. He stammered something about being put in a tough position, about the opportunity being too big to refuse. I listened, my mind working with the cold precision of one of my lab's sequencing machines. I heard the weakness in his voice, the self-interest masquerading as helplessness. He wasn't a villain, not like Marcus. He was just a pawn, and in the game I was about to play, pawns were often the first to be sacrificed. I have to go, Leo, I interrupted him mid-sentence. Enjoy your new office. I hear the view is excellent. I ended the call before he could respond, placing my phone face down on the desk. The sympathy I might have felt for him evaporated. He had made his choice. He had chosen ambition over loyalty, and in doing so, he had become part of the problem. As I looked at the box of personal effects, a small, sad collection representing a life dedicated to this company, I felt the last vestiges of grief recede. In its place, something harder and more formidable began to crystallize. Marcus saw me as emotional, volatile, and weak. He, and by extension, Leo, saw my passion as a flaw. They believed they had won because they had played a corporate game better than I had. But they had both forgotten one crucial thing. Marcus, in his arrogance, and Leo, in his ambition, had forgotten who I truly was. I wasn't just a passionate scientist. I was a brilliant one, and I was a meticulous planner. To understand the depth of Marcus Thorne's betrayal, you have to understand the ecosystem he created at Innovatech Dynamics. I joined the company 12 years ago, a hopeful scientist with a head full of theories and a desire to build things that mattered. Marcus was already the director of R&D, a man who commanded respect with his sharp suits, articulate speeches, and a seemingly encyclopedic knowledge of our field. He was a master of appearances. He could walk into a lab, ask 3 or 4 insightful-sounding questions, and leave the entire team feeling both motivated and scrutinized. In the beginning, I was impressed. He was my champion. He secured funding for my initial, highly theoretical research into biointegration. Victoria has a vision. I once overheard him telling a vice president, my job is simply to give her the runway she needs to take flight. It was a beautiful sentiment. It was also the beginning of his strategy. He wasn't giving me a runway, he was building his own launchpad on my foundation. The pattern was always the same. I would work for months, sometimes years, in the quiet solitude of the lab, wrestling with complex problems. I would hit dead ends, reroute, and eventually, through sheer persistence and creative insight, achieve a breakthrough. I would write up my findings, my data, my conclusions, and present them to Marcus in our one-on-one meetings. He would listen intently, nodding, his expression one of profound understanding. Brilliant, Victoria, truly brilliant, he would say. Let me handle the board, you focus on the science, That's where you shine. I foolishly, gratefully would let him. I hated the corporate glad-handing, the political maneuvering of the boardroom. I loved the purity of the work, so I would retreat to my lab while Marcus went before the executives. He would use my slides, my data, my discoveries, and reframe them. My breakthroughs became evidence of his astute project management. My innovative solutions became the result of his strategic vision. He never said, "I discovered this." He was too clever for that. He would say things like, "As my team, under my direction, has now established," or "The strategy I implemented for Project Chimera is yielding exactly the results we projected." He was positioning himself as the grand conductor, and I was merely the first violin, a talented but ultimately replaceable musician in his orchestra. He thrived on this ambiguity. To the board, he was the visionary leader. To the lab teams, he was the supportive director who cleared the path for them. He kept us isolated, praised us in private, and claimed the glory in public. His professional reputation was a magnificent edifice built entirely with bricks that I had fired in my own kiln. Over time, his interest in my actual work became more and more superficial. He'd ask about budgets and timelines, not about the science itself. He became particularly fixated on Project Chimera's commercial applications, his eyes lighting up whenever I mentioned a new potential revenue stream. He saw the project not as a scientific marvel, but as a golden ticket, his legacy, the final, undeniable proof of his genius that would cement his position in the company for good. The more successful Chimera became, the more he tightened his grip, subtly pushing me out of high-level meetings and taking over communications with other departments. He started referring to it as my flagship project. He was a cuckoo bird, laying his egg in my nest, waiting for the moment he could push the rightful occupant out. The too emotionally invested comment wasn't a spur-of-the-moment insult. It was the final, carefully crafted narrative tool to justify the theft he had been planning all along. He needed to discredit me to legitimize his own claim. By painting me as an unstable artist, he could position himself as the calm, rational businessman needed to turn my chaotic creativity into cold, hard profit. When I arrived home, the silence of my small, neat house was a welcome embrace. I placed the cardboard box on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long moment, breathing. The house was quiet. The world was quiet. My mind, however, was not. It was a whirlwind of calculations, strategies, and contingencies. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. Marcus thought he had checkmated me. He had failed to realize I wasn't even playing on the same board. I walked into my study, a room far more personal than my office at Innovatech. Here, my own awards hung on the wall, not ones with Marcus's name appended to them. Here, my personal research library was filled with books I had actually read. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My fingers, which had trembled with rage just hours before, were now steady as they typed. My investigation wasn't about digging up dirt on Marcus. I didn't need to. His greatest crime was about to be exposed by his own hubris. My investigation was about executing a plan I had quietly put in place over the last 6 months, a contingency for the betrayal I knew was inevitable. Marcus wasn't as subtle as he thought he was. I had seen the shift, the increasing possessiveness over my work, the way he looked at me with an expression that was less collegial and more proprietary. I navigated to a secure, encrypted folder on my hard drive. Inside was a file named Insurance. It contained every email where Marcus had vaguely alluded to my discoveries as his own, every meeting summary where my contributions were minimized, and most importantly, a meticulously documented timeline of Project Chimera's development, complete with time-stamped lab notes, data sets, and my personal, signed and dated journal entries. It was a mountain of evidence. But evidence was for a court battle, a messy, protracted affair that would still leave my reputation in question. I needed something cleaner, something more definitive. I opened my email client and searched for a message I had received at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The subject line was simple: U.S. Patent and Trademark Office filing receipt. I clicked it open. There it was, in black and white. a provisional patent application for a system and method for synergistic biointegration of synthetic tissue, the core technology of Project Chimera. The filing was comprehensive, covering every novel process and application I had developed. And at the bottom, under the section marked Inventor, was a single name, Dr. Victoria Reed. I had used my own funds, my own time, and my own legal counsel. I had deliberately excluded any mention of Innovatech Dynamics. The work was conceived and executed by me. The company had provided the lab space and the funding, which entitled them to a shop right, the right to use the invention. But ownership? In the eyes of the law, the inventor is the owner. I had the receipt. I had the proof. I own my life's work. A slow smile spread across my face. This was the key. This was the leverage. This was the trap. Marcus was about to stand before the board and promise them a golden goose that, legally, belonged to me. Now for the final step. I picked up my personal phone and scrolled through. My contacts. I stopped at a name I hadn't called in over a year, but whose owner I respected immensely, Julian Croft, CEO of Apex Biosolutions, Innovatech's fiercest and most innovative competitor. We had served on a university advisory panel together. He was sharp, no nonsense, and a brilliant scientist in his own right before he'd moved into the corporate sphere. He valued genius, not bureaucracy. I took a deep breath and made the call. I didn't get through to him directly, of course. His executive assistant, a polite and efficient woman, answered. "This is Dr. Victoria Reed," I said calmly. "I have a time-sensitive business proposition for Mr. Croft. It concerns a recent patent filing that I believe will be of significant interest to him. It directly impacts the market position of his primary competitor." The words were chosen carefully, designed to pierce the corporate armor. Time-sensitive, patent filing, primary competitor. It worked. The assistant's professional tone sharpened with interest. She asked me to hold. Less than a minute later, a new voice was on the line. It was deep, calm, and radiated authority. "This is Julian Croft. Dr. Reed, you have my attention." I spent the next 10 minutes laying out a very condensed, very professional version of the situation, omitting the personal drama and focusing on the facts. A revolutionary, market-disrupting technology, a newly filed patent establishing sole inventorship, and an inventor who was now, as of today, a free agent. There was a moment of silence when I finished. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the calculations being made. "Dr. Reed," he finally said, his voice laced with something that sounded like grim appreciation. "It seems my day has just become a great deal more interesting. I have a board meeting I need to reschedule. Can you be at my headquarters tomorrow morning at 9? 9 o'clock would be perfect," I replied. "It's my personal day after all." The headquarters of Apex Biosolutions was everything Innovatech's was not. Where Innovatech's building was a monument to corporate beige and dark wood, all hushed tones and imposing portraits of past executives, Apex was a symphony of glass, steel, and light. The lobby was open and airy, with a living wall of green plants breathing life into the space. There was a palpable buzz of energy, of people collaborating in open-concept spaces, their voices alive with excitement. It felt less like a corporate fortress and more like a futuristic university campus. I was escorted directly to the executive floor, to a large conference room with a panoramic view of the city. Julian Croft was already there, standing by the window. He was a man in his early 60s, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't wearing a tie. He turned as I entered, a welcoming but serious smile on his face. "Dr. Reed, Victoria, thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've asked my Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Eris Thorne, and our Head of Legal, Ms. Chen, to join us." He gestured to the two other people in the room, who stood and nodded politely. We sat around a large glass table. There were no pretenses, no small talk. Julian got straight to the point. "As you can imagine, your call yesterday sparked a great deal of internal discussion," he began, leaning forward. I've had my team do a preliminary search based on the abstract you sent over. What you're describing, if it's viable, it's not just an improvement on existing technology. It's a paradigm shift. It's viable, I said simply. I opened my briefcase and took out a tablet. And I have the data to prove it. This was the first confrontation, not with Marcus, but with his narrative. For years, he had presented my work. Now, for the first time, I was presenting it myself to people who mattered. For the next hour, I walked them through Project Chimera. I didn't just present the data, I told the story of its creation. I explained the dead ends, the eureka moments, the intricate science that made it all work. I spoke with the passion Marcus had derided, but here, in this room, it was not a liability. It was proof of my authority. I could see it in their eyes, the focused intensity of Dr. Eris Thorne, the sharp, calculating gaze of Ms. Chen, the growing excitement on Julian Croft's face. When I finished, there was a moment of impressed silence. "Incredible," Dr. Thorne murmured, looking at Julian. "This is 5, maybe 10 years ahead of anything we have in development, anything anyone has in development." Julian nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on me. "And you're certain Innovatech is unaware that you have filed?" "I am certain," I confirmed. "My former director, Marcus Thorne, is planning to present the technology to his board and investors this week as the crowning achievement of his own strategic leadership." Ms. Chen, the lawyer, finally spoke, her voice precise. "And you have the patent filing receipt?" "I do," I said. I slid a folder across the table. It contained a hard copy of the filing receipt and a declaration, signed by me, attesting to the circumstances of the invention. She read it carefully, her expression unreadable. She then passed it to Julian. He looked at the single name listed under inventor and then looked up at me. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who has just seen his opponent walk into a devastatingly elegant trap. "Marcus Thorne," he said, almost to himself. "I've known him for years, always more style than substance. I never imagined he'd have the audacity to attempt something on this scale." He looked at me, his respect clear. "He has no idea what's about to happen to him." Ms. Chen cleared her throat. "From a legal standpoint, this is remarkably clean. Dr. Reed is the inventor. Innovatech may have a shop right, allowing them to use the technology internally, but they do not own the patent. They cannot license it, they cannot sell it, and they certainly cannot build their entire future business strategy around it without the express consent of the owner. You, Dr. Reed." The pieces were all on the table now. The confrontation was complete, the truth revealed. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made threats. I had simply presented the facts to the right audience. In this room, my emotional investment was recognized for what it was, the intellectual and creative ownership of a masterpiece. Julian Croft leaned back in his chair. "Victoria," he said, the name now familiar, comfortable. "Let's talk about what your future at Apex Biosolutions would look like. I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a department. Your own lab, your own team, and a budget that will make Innovatech's R&D funding look like a rounding error. All we need is your signature on an exclusive licensing agreement for your patent." The next 48 hours were a blur of intense, productive activity. While Julian's legal team, led by the formidable Ms. Chen, drafted the contracts for my new role and the exclusive licensing of the Chimera patent, I was locked in marathon sessions with Dr. Eris Thorne and his top scientists. We were building the case, not a legal one, but a business one. We were mapping out the launch strategy, the production timeline, and the press release that would announce Apex's acquisition of the decade's most important biotech innovation. The energy was electric. I felt more seen and respected in 2 days at Apex than I had in 12 years at Innovatech. Meanwhile, back in the muted corridors of my old company, Marcus Thorne was preparing for his coronation. I knew his playbook. He would be holding court, basking in the anticipatory glow of his triumph. He'd be coaching Leo Martinez, filling the young man's head with visions of a fast-tracked career, ensuring his loyalty when the spotlight shone on them. Marcus was so cocooned in his own arrogance that the thought of me doing anything other than quietly accepting my fate would never even cross his mind. He saw me as a problem that had been solved. The call came on the second afternoon. It was Leo. His number flashed on my screen, and this time I answered immediately. "Victoria, it's Leo." He sounded stressed, his voice thin. "I know," I said, my tone neutral. I was in a temporary office at Apex, a sleek, minimalist space with a view of a Japanese garden. It was peaceful. "Listen, I feel terrible about how this all went down," he began, and this time the guilt sounded genuine. He's planning a huge presentation for the investors tomorrow. He's got my name on the slides as the new project lead. It feels wrong." "It is wrong, Leo," I said without malice. "He's telling everyone that you stepped down for personal reasons, that you were happy to pass the torch," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I saw you packing your things. You didn't look happy." I stayed silent, letting him talk. He was building my case for me without even realizing it. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, a desperate edge to his voice. "Maybe I can talk to him, tell him he needs to give you proper credit." A part of me felt a flicker of pity for him. He was caught in the gears of a machine far bigger than he was, a machine that was about to fly apart spectacularly. But he had chosen to get on board. "You made your choice, Leo," I said, my voice soft but firm, echoing my words from our last call. "You chose to believe him. You chose the promotion. Soon, everyone will have to live with the consequences of their choices. Mine, Marcus's, and yours." "What does that mean?" he asked, a note of panic creeping in. "It means you should pay very close attention to the financial news tomorrow afternoon," I said. "And I wish you the very best of luck. You're going to need it." I hung up. The stakes were now higher than ever. It wasn't just about my own vindication anymore. It was about the future of two major companies, about shareholder value, about the careers of hundreds of people. Marcus had built a house of cards on a foundation of my work, and I was about to remove the one card that held it all up. The case was built, the contracts were signed, and the press conference was scheduled. All that was left was the final, public act. The Innovatech Dynamics annual investor showcase was Marcus Thorne's favorite day of the year. It was his stage, his theater. The event was held in a lavish hotel ballroom, with dramatic lighting, a huge projection screen, and an open bar. It was an exercise in corporate pageantry, designed to dazzle investors and analysts with visions of future profits. This year, the entire event was built around the unveiling of Project Chimera. I wasn't there, of course, but I had a source. A former colleague, a quiet lab technician I had always treated with respect, was sending me text updates. 1:45 p.m., ballroom is packed, big turnout. Marcus is backstage, looking like the cat that ate the canary. 2:05 p.m., he's on stage, getting a huge round of applause. He's starting his speech, all about a new era of innovation. I could picture it perfectly. Marcus, bathed in a spotlight, his voice resonating with false sincerity. He would be weaving a grand narrative of his own brilliance, talking about the risks he took, the vision he pursued, the team he led to greatness. At precisely 2:15 p.m., on the other side of the city, Julian Croft stepped up to a podium in the Apex Biosolutions auditorium. The room was filled with journalists from every major financial news outlet. I stood just off to the side of the stage, out of the main lights, watching. "Good afternoon," Julian began, his voice calm and authoritative. "We've called you here today to announce a development that will reshape the landscape of biotechnology. Apex has, this morning, entered into an exclusive partnership with one of this generation's most brilliant scientific minds. With this partnership, we have also secured the exclusive global rights to a revolutionary, patented technology that will change the future of medicine." Back in the hotel ballroom, Marcus was hitting his stride. 2:18 p.m., he's showing the project timeline. My timeline, he's calling it the Thorne strategy. I feel sick. Marcus clicked to the next slide. It was a projection of revenue, a dizzying upward curve. "And this," he announced, his voice booming with pride, "is the future that Project Chimera, under my continued leadership, will deliver to Innovatech and to our valued shareholders." At that exact moment, across the city, Julian Croft said the magic words. This technology, formerly known by its development codename Chimera, is now exclusively the property of Apex Biosolutions. And we are thrilled to introduce the mind behind it all, the sole inventor and our new executive director of biointegration, Dr. Victoria Reed. He turned and gestured to me. As I stepped forward into the warm, bright lights, a dozen cameras flashed at once. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new text. 2:20 p.m. Oh my God. News alerts are hitting everyone's phones. Apex just announced they own Chimera. People are whispering, "What is happening?" On the stage at Apex, I spoke briefly and calmly about my vision for the technology, about the honor of joining a team that valued true innovation. I didn't mention Marcus. I didn't mention Innovatech. I didn't have to. The press release, which had just been sent to every major news wire, told the whole story, complete with the patent number and a link to the public filing. The final text came through at 2:25 p.m. It was a photo, a blurry, candid shot of the stage at the Innovatech event. Marcus was no longer basking in the spotlight. He was standing, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The company's chief counsel was on stage with him, whispering urgently in his ear, his own face grim. In the background, the slide projecting billions in future revenue seemed like a cruel joke. The audience wasn't looking at him anymore. They were all looking down at their phones, at the news of his spectacular, public implosion. The king had been dethroned in his own throne room, not by an army, but by a single, undeniable fact. The work was never his. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Innovatech's stock went into freefall before the market even closed, shedding nearly 40% of its value in a single afternoon. The investor showcase ended in chaos. Marcus Thorne was reportedly escorted from the premises by security, his personal day turning into a permanent one. By morning, the company had issued a terse statement announcing his termination for gross professional misconduct and misrepresentation of company assets. My first few months at Apex were a whirlwind. I was given the resources, the team, and the autonomy I had only ever dreamed of. We streamlined the development of the Chimera technology, now officially rebranded as the Reed Protocol, and fast-tracked it for clinical trials. The scientific community, once they understood the full story, rallied around me. I was no longer the forgotten woman in the lab. I was a symbol of intellectual integrity triumphing over corporate greed. About a month after the incident, I received a carefully worded letter from Leo Martinez. It was a genuine apology this time, stripped of excuses. He detailed how Marcus had manipulated him and admitted his own willful blindness and ambition. He also attached a sworn statement detailing every instance he had witnessed of Marcus taking credit for my work and offered to testify on my behalf should any legal proceedings arise. I passed the letter to Ms. Chen and the Apex legal team. They graciously accepted his statement, which they added to the growing mountain of evidence they were compiling as Innovatech's board began a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to claim some rights to the technology. They eventually settled, issuing a public apology to me and paying a substantial fee to Apex for the foundational resources used in the early stages of my research. It was a pittance compared to the patent's value, but it was a public admission of their failure. The last I heard of Marcus Thorne, he was facing multiple lawsuits from Innovatech shareholders and was under investigation for securities fraud. His reputation was destroyed. He was a pariah in the industry he had tried so desperately to conquer. He hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his entire identity, an identity that had been a fiction all along. One afternoon, about a year after I had joined Apex, I was walking through my new state-of-the-art laboratory. It was a beautiful space, filled with brilliant young scientists buzzing with the same energy I had felt when I first started my career. My new team was collaborative, respectful, and fiercely intelligent. There were no secrets, no stolen credit, just pure, unadulterated science. I paused at the entrance to my office. On the wall, in a simple, elegant frame, hung the official certificate for United States patent number 12,834,917. Below the seal of the USPTO was the title, System and Method for Synergistic Biointegration of Synthetic Tissue. And beneath that, the single, beautiful word that meant more to me than any job title or stock option: inventor. I looked at it, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a sense of profound peace. Marcus had called me too emotional, and he was right. My work was emotional. It was born of passion, of dedication, of love for the elegant mystery of science. He had seen that love as a weakness to be exploited. He never understood that it was, and always had been, the source of my greatest strength.